everyone. I am on vacation with my family. Yes, I'm on vacation. But in lieu of the big report that we're expecting on unidentified flying objects or unidentified aerial phenomena as they're known now, this UFO report, I wanted to bring back one of my favorite shows. And it's with Luis Elizando, and he was head of the UAP program at the Pentagon. Remember that? This is the Unidentified Aerial Phenomena program at the Pentagon, and he's been working diligently and talking to reporters about what the government has been investigating as far as these unidentified aerial vehicles. And this phenomena that we've been seeing in our skies. Now, last year's huge COVID relief package, that was the $2.3 trillion appropriation bill, did several things, right, with COVID and coronavirus. But what a lot of people don't know is that it also dealt with these unidentified aerial phenomena. And it was signed into law by President Donald Trump. And it basically stated that our government has to turn over a report to Congress. And it's contained in the Intelligence Authorization Act for fiscal year 2021. So this year, it had 180 days, right? So it's any time now to turn over this report on these unidentified flying objects. Now, former Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, said to Maria Bartiromo in a recent interview that this is going to be a big deal. This is not just some report. These aren't going to be, we're not talking here about weather balloons. And I'm taking this very seriously because this changes so much for us, right? We have been told and lied to, of course, for a long time now about what we're seeing in the sky. We don't really understand it. Are there little green men flying around? I know. Maybe, probably not. I don't know. Maybe they're different. I don't know. But maybe we don't know what it is. Our government knows a lot more than what they are telling us. But one thing is for sure. If this is proof of intelligent life outside of our planet Earth, right, and that we are being visited, then it changes the ball game. This will be the greatest discovery or revelation, I call it, in human history, and we will be alive for that and to see that. And we really got to take that seriously. I thought it was really interesting when Maria Bartiromo talked to Ratcliffe because he said, and this is quote unquote, frankly, there are a lot more sightings than have been made public. And that's very interesting to me. He also said, what the report must include. It must include detailed analysis of unidentified aerial phenomena, data, and intelligence. That's what's required. Whether all of that will be declassified, I don't know. But anyways, Luis Elizondo, the last interview I did with him, I did several, but the last one to me was so fascinating. It really was an eye opener. I had so many letters from people, so much information coming from everywhere, people that wanted to know more about the subject, wanted to talk about it seriously. It's not something that is just pretend. It's not something we want to make fun of. This is something that I'm very serious about. I think it's very important. I'm an investigative journalist, and I think this is probably one of the greatest stories that I've ever had the pleasure or the opportunity to work on. So, and remember, this podcast is brought to you by this amazing organization I talk about all the time. It's AMAC, the Association of Mature American Citizens. It is the fastest growing conservative 50-plus organization in America. In just a few short years, over 2 million people have joined AMAC and now carry their AMAC membership card. AMAC believes in the values that have made America so great: faith, family, and freedom. It offers an alternative to just about every benefit that AARP offers, but without the liberal agenda, folks. I stand with AMAC. I hope that you will too. I encourage you to join today at amac.us/Carter. That's amac.us/Carter. The benefits of membership are great, but the cause is even greater. Join today at amac.us/Carter. Now, I hope all of you get a chance to spend some time with your families. I am actually spending some time with my family during this spring break because we got all of our 6 kids together so that they can all be together and have fun as a family. And I can finally get that family photo that I have been begging for years now, because we just can't get them all together at this exact same time. It's just insanity. So this time we're doing it. I wish you all a great spring break, and I hope you're all having fun. And without any further delay, take a listen to this. I'll be listening to it along with you. It's my favorite interview with one of my favorite guys and now a very good friend, Luis Elizando, former head of the Pentagon's UAP, Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon program. Lou, you're back. I have you. Part 2. I'm so excited.
Well, Sarah, as always, thank you very much for having me. And you know, I know I keep saying this and it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, but thank you for covering this topic. I think it's very important. And I think what people will begin to realize is that the rest of the country and our leadership, I think, is at a point where they're beginning to take this topic seriously too. And, you know, I say this over and over again, but in large part, that's really not because of anything I've done. It's because of things that you are doing now in the media. Key figures like you that are willing to go out on a limb and report on something that has historically been considered extremely taboo and quite frankly, fringe. So thanks to you, this is happening.
It's just crazy, right? I can't imagine that we live on a planet like, you know, we've talked about this, Lou, and for all of you who have not heard part 1, you got to listen to part 1 of this podcast with Luis Elizando, because you are going to be blown away. And we're going to go over a little bit of what we talked about then in this podcast, but we're also going to hit areas that you did not get a chance to talk about, Lou, while you were here last time. But the most important thing to think about here, and this is to just take away this kind of stigma, is that we are on a planet. Remember, we're on a small planet in this ginormous universe, right? With galaxies and solar systems and planets and suns and stars, you know, all over the place. And, you know, billions of planets that we know of are out there. And we're supposed to imagine that we are the only life form, that this planet is it. Even if we're not being visited by, you know, aliens, so to speak, it's still ridiculous to laugh at the fact that there is life outside this planet, right, Lou? I mean,
yeah. I mean, Sarah, you again, you bring up a fantastic point. Let's break this down exactly what you said, because the American people either may or may not be surprised that we spend each year, we as American taxpayers, forget about internationally, just us, billions of dollars with a NASA budget, billions with a B, in order to send probes into other planets like Mars, et cetera, and moons, in the hopes of maybe kind of possibly finding some sort of microbial life. And then you have other efforts such as SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, where
right.
It's actually part of their mission to find extraterrestrial intelligence. And at one point, again, millions of taxpayer dollars were used to try to find these electronic signatures in these perhaps exo worlds that exist beyond our solar system, to hopefully maybe one day detect some sort of signs of life. So for us to engage in this effort as a country, I don't think it's unusual. There's a long history of us doing this in the past and frankly doing it even currently. So what we did in the Pentagon is simply that, using that same line of logic, and ask the question, okay, we have pilots that are seeing interesting things in the sky. We're picking them up on gun camera footage. We're picking them up on radar. Is it possible that there is potentially some of this life right here on this planet? And I think if you look at the vastness, as you said, of space, I would encourage your audience to look up on Google one day and just type in under images, pale blue dot. And it's a famous photograph that was taken by one of our probes. And as it was leaving the solar system, it turned back around and it snapped a happy snap of Mother Earth. And what you will notice, unless you really look carefully, all you see is this black vastness of space. And somewhere in the middle of that black vastness of space, you'll find this little tiny, maybe 4 pixels blue dot. And that is everything we have ever known, everything we have ever done, everything that we've ever felt and loved and feared, all has occurred on that tiny little blue dot hurtling through the vastness of space. And I think you're absolutely right. There was a few scientists now that have used the statistics that there are more stars in the visible universe than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of all the world. Now, that is a huge, fantastically huge number when you look at it.
Well, it's so incredible that when I think about it, it makes me feel not only unique and special being a part of this whatever experiment of the universe, right? Being part of mankind, right? Being a part of this earth, but it also makes me feel so small, right? It makes me feel like, wow, what else is out there? I mean, I played a clip, at the beginning of the show, President Trump talking about putting a man or a woman on Mars for the first time, that's a goal for the United States, is to reach Mars and to build a lab or facility on Mars, which I'm all about. I'm all about Space Force moving humankind forward, right? Moving us forward.
Mm-hmm.
But it is, when you talk about it in those terms, it's like, yeah, you're right, Lou. For anybody else looking back, right? Anybody else looking back at Earth from space, we're so small. We're so small. And everything that we've known has happened on that small little dot, right? And now I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at the stats. I mean, let's go back and review really quick what you talked about in part one of the show about these unidentified aerial phenomena. You talked about observing these craft, right, that have no appearance of wings, that appear to not have any kind of similar structure to what we see here on Earth. They're pulling 400 to 500 to 600 Gs when the human body can only withstand about 9 Gs, right? They're moving as fast as possible, doing things that we've never seen before. So you have to wonder what's going on here, right?
Yeah, well, I think you're right on target, because one of the things we did when I was the if you will, the director of ATIP, in charge of the manager of whatever title, whatever that is. I think it's important to know that we spent a lot of money, time and effort, taxpayer money, your hard-earned dollars, trying to figure out what this enigma is. And part of that, we had commissioned some academic studies through some renowned academic institutions, some of the best, by the way. And one of those studies was on the Drake equation. So what is the Drake equation? Well, the Drake equation is a mathematical equation that was proposed some time ago, this last century, to try to predict, to the best of our ability, the likelihood, the possibility that life exists in this universe, and if so, to what degree does life exist? And that was one of the actual studies that we commissioned, looking at the Drake equation and then comparing that information based upon the data we had at the Pentagon. Is it possible these things may not necessarily be foreign adversarial technology, but may be something completely and entirely different?
And how accurate was that? I mean, it's very possible, right? It's very possible that these are not foreign adversary, but that these do come from somewhere we're unfamiliar with.
Yeah, I think I think it may be even be a little bit more than just possible. Again, I want to, kind of like last time, forgive me, I want to be very careful injecting my own personal opinion, and by doing that, maybe my own bias. I don't want to, if you will, prejudice the jury in this particular instance. So I think it's important that we continue to collect the data and present that data in a consumable manner that then you, the jury, your audience, taxpayers, hardworking Americans, can then make the determination for themselves. What is this? Is this a national security? Is this an opportunity? Is this a threat? Right? All the litany, if you will, of possible scenarios that this could involve. But, to be completely straightforward with you, yes, we were looking at the potential, the possibility, if these things were, but not from here.
Well, and this is where I want to go. Why do you think, based on that, the Pentagon's doing it? To me, it doesn't seem ridiculous at all. To me, if we weren't doing that, it would be ridiculous, right? So if we weren't actually trying to study, trying to understand what is happening in our vastness of space. What are we seeing here on planet Earth as far as these ships? I think that would be a failure. I'm actually grateful that U.S. tax dollars are going to the study of these unidentified aerial phenomena, or these UFOs, unidentified flying objects. But why do you think there are people in the government that are so adamant at trying to discredit, even though this is a department within the government, that want to keep it secret, that are so adamant about discrediting anyone who speaks out against it? What do you think is going on there? Because this has been happening since the very first major reports, like coming out of Roswell in the United States, when there was reports that one of these vehicles, or that something from space, had crashed in New Mexico in the 1940s. And why do you think they are so determined to keep it secret?
Well, simply put, I think it boils down to fear, the basic human emotion of fear. Now, whether that fear stems from some sort of theological bias, because the way somebody was raised, maybe, or because of something else, let's look at it as parents, for example. A lot of us, and probably your audience, are parents or new parents and have sons or daughters, and you put your child to bed at night and give them a kiss and maybe read them a bedtime story. And you know what? There's a thunderstorm out there in the horizon, and the lightning is pretty intense, and the thunder's getting louder and louder. Now, there's not a whole lot you can do about it, but your child is still fearful, scared of it. So what do we do as parents? Well, we try to dampen some of that fear, right? We try to explain that, well, it's actually just an atmospheric condition that's going on, and thunder is just a result of lightning, and lightning is just a result of static electricity in the air, and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, look, lightning has killed people, and it can be dangerous, and thunder can be pretty scary. So I think a lot of this comes from fear. And I think when you have a government, you have an organization that's by design there to have answers, have solutions, and there are no solutions, that generates a great bit of anxiety within the leadership. I know it did even with us. I can tell you how many times I've had interviews with individuals where I was providing some of this detailed information, whether to bring on the new candidate, maybe to help with ATIP, or maybe I was briefing a senior leader in DOD. And everybody consumed this information a little bit differently. Some people were so shocked that they literally could not process, after an hour worth of briefings and video and images and having pilots come in and provide their testimony. It was a complete blank stare. And I don't think it's necessarily anyone's particular fault. It's just that you're asking somebody to, in a very brief, short period of time, change their fundamental paradigm of the way they look at the universe and the way they see themselves in the universe, and maybe even how we see ourselves as a society, right? Maybe we're, quote unquote, not at the top of the food chain anymore, whether that's technologically speaking or anything else. So I think it's a big pill to swallow. And I think we've also spent so much time ridiculing this topic. Now that we are forced to take this topic seriously, there's a lot of ground that we have to recover, because we spent so much time, if you will, burning the fields, right, and ridiculing anybody who may have data on this, that nobody wanted to report it. I would debrief pilots and special operators and law enforcement folks all the time, and they would look around over their shoulders and say, "Look, Lou, I don't feel comfortable talking about this. I don't want to lose my clearance, right? I don't want to lose my flight status. I don't want people to think I'm weird. This is my job. I pay my mortgage this way. I put my kids to school. I don't want to risk losing that just to have a conversation with you about something that me and my flight crew witnessed."
See, that's where I'm right there with you, because when you think about having to rebuild, go back, talk to folks, look at the historical data, figure it out. What were we missing? Because we weren't studying that. We weren't looking at this. We weren't taking it seriously for the most part. That's got to be very difficult. I wanted to ask you about historical data, because I know that it's out there. We hear about it all the time, that, hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago, there were reports, or at least seeming reports, of the possibility that our ancient ancestors were also witnessing something in the skies, correct?
Yeah, there's a lot of text out there that is definitely historically authenticated as being real text. When I was in in Rome not too long ago. I had the honor and privilege of speaking to some folks in the Vatican, some senior academics, and they provided to myself and some of my colleagues a copy of an ancient text. And this was a correspondence between a Roman soldier and his general. And in there, they describe these, what they call in Latin, eclipus. Eclipus is the designation of the Roman shield. It's this round, lenticular-shaped shield that the Romans would carry. And they describe these flaming Roman shields in the sky that would follow them from battle to battle. So there is a lot of text there. And there's also, I think people might be surprised that there's a lot of official U.S. government documentation that at one point was extremely classified that is also available. Anybody right now with a computer or a smartphone can get on a search engine and see some of the most recent documents that have been released from the U.S. government and our archives. And you can see that they were very classified. And the exact same observables that our pilots are reporting today, as of today, have been reported going back into the late 40s, 50s, and 60s and 70s. And these are through intelligence channels. These are what we call IIRs, Intelligence Information Reports. And you're highly classified, highly sensitive documents. Right. And you have field operators reporting these things through official collection channels.
Well, this is incredible. Okay, so we have these reports. They're declassifying a lot of them now. I've seen some of them myself. Why do you think the government's at this point? And we've talked about this. We talked about this on the last interview. But why do you think the government is at the point right now where we're starting to see more information come out? Is there something going on or something that's going to happen or something that we're not aware of that makes it easier for them to give this disclosure?
You know, Sarah, it's I think we're reaching a critical mass, as I said last time during our last discussion. I think we're reaching a tipping point. The prevalence of smartphones and smart technology and personal devices that are on hand has been proliferated now at a global level. Everybody almost on the planet has some sort of smartphone in their hand, and they have the ability to take pictures that 10 years ago would require multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment to do, and now we can do it with literally a tap of our thumb on our smartphone. So I think there's a combination. I think there is more information coming in, routine, and also it's getting harder and harder to keep the cat in the bag, to deny this, because we now have our trained observers with top secret security clearances reporting this. And I'll even go a step further. Some of these, and I might get in a little bit of trouble for saying this, but I should be okay. We're at a point now where you have brave men and women in uniform flying some of the most sophisticated aircraft on the planet. And they are taking out their smartphones while they are at 35,000 feet screaming at supersonic speeds and using their iPhones and their Android devices to take actual pictures of UAPs from their cockpit. I mean, it almost sounds a little bit fantastical and humorous and something you might see in a movie, but that's actually occurring because they're coming across these things and saying, look, I got to take a picture of this thing because you're not going to believe it. And some of these pictures are very compelling. And these pictures find themselves.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
You've seen some of the pictures?
Absolutely, I have. And these pictures are finding themselves now getting into official government channels and through certain reporting that now our analysts, who, by the way, are some of the finest in the world, have the ability to now apply those analytic tools and resources to try to figure out just what the hell these things are, because they don't look like anything we have. And we're pretty certain these objects are not from any type of foreign conventional inventory that we're aware of. They're so unusual. Their flight characteristics are so abnormal that we don't even have anything to compare them to.
Describe that a little bit for everyone out there who's listening. Describe a little bit what makes them so different. I know we talked about that before, but I want to go into that before I go into the next subject of Uruguay with you. But describe a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. I think if you were to compare a brick and a feather, right? When you drop a feather, most people would anticipate that feather to kind of lightly float down and eventually hit the ground, a bit like a leaf, if you will, blowing in the wind. Whereas a brick, when you drop a brick, you can expect an extreme sudden fall, and at the bottom of that fall, a quick thud. And that's how we kind of look at physics, right? Things behave a certain way because they're bound by those laws of physics. It has to do with wind resistance and gravity and all sorts of other stuff that I won't waste your time with. But you wouldn't expect a brick, if you drop the brick, to float down like a feather. And yet that's exactly what we're seeing here. We're seeing objects, vehicles that are in the sky with no apparent wings or control surfaces or even means of propulsion. There's no rivets, there's no cockpit, there's no light, nothing that we typically associate as a conventional aircraft. And yet these things are flying right alongside our aircraft. And when I say flying, I'm not even sure if that's an accurate description. We used to use the term unidentified flying object, but flight is a very specific principle involving aerodynamics. You have to have, basically you're balancing four forces. You're balancing thrust, lift, drag, and weight. And of course you have wings and an engine to do that. Well, these things don't do that. So we're not even sure if they're technically flying, but there they are. And they're flying sometimes in ways that completely defy our understandings of aerodynamics. Imagine being in a 737 flying from, let's say, New York to LA, but able to make that flight rather than taking 5 hours, doing it in 5 minutes. And oh, by the way, having the ability to fly at right angles, or imagine that aircraft being able to fly completely perpendicular 90 degrees to the horizon and still getting to New York or to Los Angeles without falling to the ground and crashing. So these are fundamentally different. These vehicles are fundamentally different than anything that we're currently used to seeing.
So it's basically changing the concept of how we think of physics, how we think of our science, how we think of flight. It could fundamentally change humanity forever if we ever have access to one of these, or if we ever understand how they're operating, correct?
Yes, and let's not forget, Sarah, that the one thing we keep learning, hubris is, as they say, is not very kind to us as a species. We forget that Mother Nature has a vote. Every time we think there is a limitation on nature, right? Let's, for example, talk about originally when we started flying, breaking the sound barrier. It was impossible. You couldn't do it. Now we realize it's a barrier that's really not so tough to break. Let's talk about the 4-minute mile, right? It is physically impossible for anybody to run the 4-minute mile. And once that barrier was broken, all of a sudden people are able to do it over and over and over again. So I think if you look through history, we will realize that there are over and over and over again, more often than not, moments where we think we've figured out how Mother Nature works in her entirety, and we wind up being incorrect. Let's go back 2,000 years ago plus to the ancient days when the Greeks were fighting some of their neighbors, and you had this philosopher and scientist named Archimedes. And he realized, up at that point, warfare was fought with primarily swords, catapults, and battering rams. And it was just brute, blunt force. All of a sudden, he realized he could take some highly polished shields and harness the sun's energy and redirect those energy rays to the sails of enemy ships and literally catch the ships on fire as they were entering the harbor. So you have here the implementation of directed energy weapons 2,000 some years before we ever really discovered directed energy weapons, laser technology. We're only now at the point in the last 100 years where we're beginning to understand this science and being able to use it once again, rediscover this science. And so I guess my point is maybe the way these things are flying isn't necessarily new science. It's just undiscovered science. We as a species haven't figured out yet the means, the way to achieve what these things are able to achieve. It's not that it's impossible, remember, and a lot of times people will reject this because of their own analytic bias. They say, no, this is not possible because, it goes against physics. Well, not necessarily. Maybe it just goes against our current understanding of physics. And as we have seen time and time again, we still have a lot to learn.
Well, we do. And, every time I think about you at ATIP, you're working in this office, you're heading the office, everybody's investigating. I know you can't talk about a lot of things that happened inside this office in the Pentagon, and that there's a lot of classified information that you dealt with. But is there any way you can describe like the worst case scenarios? I mean, did you all sit around a desk and talk about, okay, this could be the worst case scenario with what we're seeing, or what is the best case scenario? Is there any scenarios that you could maybe share with everyone out there right now, like how you handled this?
Sure. Yeah, I think, like your husband, I'm a military man. So for me, the greatest fear is some sort of enemy being able to exploit or neutralize our most sensitive, our most capable, our most lethal defense systems. In this case, it's our nuclear technology. Nuclear technology for the United States and other world powers is really one of the absolute crown jewels of our national defense strategy. And in fact, I know a lot of people don't necessarily like nuclear technology, and I can appreciate that. But some can argue that it's actually helped keep the peace. Now, can you imagine for a moment some adversary? Let's just take the whole UAP equation out of the calculus and say some adversary has the ability to fly over within 5 or 6 minutes over our country completely undetected and interfere with our ability to defend ourselves from a nuclear strike from a foreign adversary. Completely take it down. Now, to me, that is, we spend billions of dollars creating these hardened facilities and protecting our communications, our nuclear stockpile to ensure the peace. And again, some people may argue with that, but the bottom line is that's kind of the way we look at things in the Department of Defense. All of a sudden, along comes a technology that can completely and totally neutralize and negate your nuclear response capability. So for me, that is absolutely a worst case scenario.
Have we ever seen these unidentified aerial phenomena, these vehicles? Have they ever interfered
Yes.
with our military apparatus that we know of?
Absolutely, unequivocally. And that, I think that's for us why we raise the alarm bells. There are historic incidents where people have actually come forward. These are what we call in the Air Force missileers, individuals, officers that their whole job is to turn the keys when the time comes. And they've had multiple witnesses and radar tracks. And some of this is unclassified, by the way, for your audience to look at, whether it's there's something called the northern tier of our nuclear strike capability and our nuclear defense system. And in the northern tier, you have Wyoming, you have Montana, and some of these other states that have nuclear capabilities. And historically speaking, well, there have been reports of these vehicles coming in at high rate of speed, doing 90-degree turns, hovering right over our nuclear silos and putting them offline. And even more scary is the possibility that in Russia, they've had similar incidents, but rather than putting their nuclear warheads offline, they've actually turned them on. So you can imagine from our perspective, if something has the ability to either turn off or turn on your nuclear capability without your influence, that is a huge, huge problem.
Oh, wow. I never even realized that. That's incredible. I never even knew that. What would be then, is there even a best case scenario for this? I mean, if I was looking at that and these vehicles were, and I had evidence of this, I mean, I would probably be sticking with the worst case. But has there ever been an incident that shows any type of outreach or friendly maybe communication from any of these vehicles or any communication at all?
So in fairness, there have been reports where this interaction has been benign. And when I say benign, non-threatening. Unfortunately, I can't talk a whole lot about that because as a military man, my job was to look at threats, not so much humanitarian opportunities. But taking off my Department of Defense hat, yes, I think there is also some information available that can possibly substantiate that this may be an opportunity. Perhaps there is a technology out there that has the ability within weeks, months, or years to advance human evolution 1 million years. Can you imagine what that would be like if all of a sudden we realize we're part of this, not just this universe, but this huge superverse where there is technology out there that we can learn from, and perhaps, our reliance on certain types of archaic fuel is no longer required, and certain diseases, are no longer an issue. Now, of course, this is pure wild speculation, so I don't want to leave your viewers with the idea that somehow the Pentagon was looking at this. But again, taking off my DoD hat and just putting on my hat as an American citizen, I think there's always opportunities. The question is, and I think maybe that's what's so perplexing about this enigma, because there are signs of both potentially hostile capabilities, but also maybe benign capabilities, and we just don't understand it.
Do they all appear to be the same? I mean, do they all appear to be the same type of vehicle? Or have you noticed, or has the Pentagon noticed or documented a varying type? Like maybe this looks like two totally different kind of vehicles, but both unusual technology that apparently does not exist on Earth.
So there are definitely classifications. So there were observables that the Department of Defense came up with to identify the capabilities of these craft. But then there are some physical attributes. There are definitive shapes that more or less there are probably three primary shapes of vehicles that have been witnessed. And these shapes of vehicles range in size and they range in dimensions. But their capabilities all seem to be fairly consistent. So the three shapes that are primarily witnessed are these, what you refer to these lenticular or these saucer-shaped vehicles. Then there are these elongated, or think of a cylindrical or a cigar-shaped vehicle. And then there are some very large, substantially large triangular vehicles. And these triangular vehicles can perform exactly the same way, although they're often seen flying low and slow. They have the capability to take off exactly like the other vehicles and perform the same way. So instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities, transmedium travel, all the observables. So the question is, are they different? Are these truly fundamentally different vehicles, or are they all vehicles that are coming from the same source? So let's say let's take the smaller lenticular vehicles for a second, the smaller saucer-shaped vehicles. You want to go out and run groceries. You take your hot rod sports car and you may go run some groceries and get some, a bag of chips in your Corvette. But all of a sudden now you have to take the kids to soccer practice or take the kids to the YMCA. And so now you need a Chevy Suburban. Well, that possibly may explain why you have these larger cigar-shaped vehicles. And then finally say, look, you know what, I'm going to take a bunch of my friends to a wedding shower, so I'm going to need a party bus. And so you rent yourself a party bus, and that may be the large, much substantially larger triangles. And they're all using the same technology. They're all using an internal combustion engine. They all pretty much work the same way. They all have four wheels. They have seats, and they have a steering wheel. But they're designed for different uses, different utility. Just like in the Navy, you have a small patrol boat, then you have a larger missile cruiser, and then you have an aircraft carrier, right? They're all boats.
Right.
They all use similar technology, propulsion units, but they're used for fundamentally different reasons. And that's one of the theories that we were looking at.
That you were looking at. Okay, so now that we've got that, I mean, I have so many questions. I know I'm only going to have a few more minutes with you, so I'm going to ask you a couple. Does the government have any evidence, or did these vehicles ever, or can you not talk about it, communicate with anybody here with the government or with anybody else? Do they have credible knowledge that any of these vehicles attempted to communicate in one way or another, whether that be through a language, whether that be through technology, whether that be through an email? Did they ever try to communicate with anybody on the planet that we know of?
So I can say definitively during my time at ATIP, that was not the case. We never saw an overt attempt to communicate. But then again, let's define what that means, because communication can mean a whole lot of things to different people. Communication isn't just auditory, right? So if you are a person that happens to be hearing impaired, well, maybe you communicate with sign language. So the mere fact that these things are appearing in and around us may, in fact, be a form of communication. But because we don't understand, quote unquote, that language, it doesn't mean anything, right? So
Right.
I want to be careful because I don't want to say, while I was an ATIP, there was no attempt, because from our perspective, there was no attempt. But that doesn't mean from the perspective of the whoever's behind those other vehicles, maybe that is communication. So I got to be very careful. I don't want to answer that question because, quite frankly, I could be dead wrong. Maybe we just don't understand the phenomena well enough.
Okay, another quick question have we ever documented in the United States government, or has ATIP ever documented? We hear cases all the time, people saying they've been abducted, or people saying that there's something unusual going on at their homes or on their farmlands with their animals, things of that nature, highly unusual activity around certain people or certain property. Has that ever been documented by the U.S. government or validated by your group?
Ooh, let me try to thread the needle on this one. Put simply, yes. There has been U.S. research dollars spent on trying to determine whether or not this phenomena and other phenomena, quite frankly, are relegated to geographic locations, geographic regions, hotspots, if you will. That has occurred. Boy, that's probably about all I can say, because I'm not trying to be evasive, but there were efforts ongoing that I was privy to, but I wasn't necessarily integral part of, and so it's probably best to let individuals who were integrally part of that effort to answer that question.
Okay. And I'll make sure to reach out to someone if you give me a name, because I'm so fascinated by this. I'm just like, I'm on the edge of my seat. Okay. I have one more question before I let you go, because I'm going to be bringing you back all the time, because Lou, you're going to become my most favorite person in the world, because this subject is so fascinating to me. And I know you're going to be like, oh gosh, Sarah's calling me again for another podcast. She's going to have to start paying me.
No, not at all. It's my honor and privilege, and appreciate what you're doing.
But with Uruguay, I believe it was Uruguay, we talked about on the last podcast about being the cutout at one point in time, where like basically the U.S. government was using other nations to investigate, so that we could be kind of like, well, we're really not investigating UFOs, but we have allies investigating them, so we don't have to actually say it. Could you talk a little bit about that and expand on it a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. In fact, with the little company I'm associated with now, To the Stars Academy, this is something that we've often talked about and scratched our heads because it's just so bizarre and so unusual. So when I went down to Uruguay this last year, I spoke to one of the longest standing UFO or UAP, if you will, government-sponsored organizations. Now, these are organizations that are sponsored officially by their government to do nothing more than collect and analyze and investigate UAP activity. And when I went down there and I spoke to the two gentlemen, and they were giving me a briefing on their current investigations and some of the historical investigations, I asked a simple question. Well, how was this established? Whose idea was it? Presuming that probably it was maybe some sort of four-star general at the time. And they said, no, actually, our program was established in 1978 because of a direct request by the United States Embassy. And they proceeded to show me a memorandum that came from the U.S. Embassy there to Uruguay through official channels, requesting that they establish their own UFO program. And interestingly enough, the handbook, the SOP, Standing Operating Procedures, in which that they were to use, recommended by the U.S. government, was none other than the handbooks used for Project Blue Book here in the United States, which was a program that was later defunct and was no longer funded. And of course, most Americans were told that there was nothing to see here, folks, and so we're going to shut this UFO program down. Lo and behold, it turns out that the U.S. government was actually secretly behind channels working with other governments for them to establish their own UFO program. Now, the question remains, was the U.S. really interested in UFOs, or were they really interested at the time trying to track new Russian Soviet technology like the Sukhoi 22 and some of these other advanced aircraft. The jury is still out, but if you wanted to get into a situation with a foreign government, to track foreign advanced aircraft, there's ways to do it. I can't imagine you would want to use a cover of UFOs, which is already fraught with stigma, and try to ruin an international relationship and try to encourage somebody to set up a program after you've just told the American people that there's nothing to see here, unless there really is something to see here.
I agree. Why do that? Why the rigmarole, right? Why do all of that? If why would you use UFO even as a cover? Why would you even bring it up? You would just set up a program that would focus on Russia, would focus on their aircraft, would focus on, those threats that could probably present themselves to the Western Hemisphere. To me, that's fascinating. That's something that we should actually look into a little bit more. I'm sure you are. Can you let everyone out here in the audience know exactly where they can go to follow you, as well as maybe view these shows? And I don't know if your Uruguay is going to be on an upcoming season of Unidentified, but could you let them know?
Yeah, sure. So I am part of so first of all, for the record, I am not an actor. What you see is what you get on the television show with History Channel. So it's Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation. And in essence, it's a television program where they have cameras following us around doing what we would normally do in ATIP. We're just now doing it in the civilian world. And if they want to kind of see this play-by-play, this camera over our shoulder as we're interacting with these individuals, they can check out it on History Channel. And we just finished our second season. Hopefully season 3 will be even more enlightening. But we actually show Uruguay, that episode, on season 2. So if you haven't seen it yet, Sarah, you probably will hear very shortly. It's pretty compelling. I think you're going to find it very interesting. Also, if they want to follow what we're doing day to day, they can just simply log on to our website, To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, and kind of see what folks like Christopher Mellon, former DASD to the Pentagon, myself, Steve Justice, former Lockheed Martin senior program manager at Skunkworks, what we're up to and what we're doing. It's a really transparent process. We're trying our best to bring everybody along with us. As I've said before, this is an awfully big bus. We've got room for everybody, and everybody gets to drive the bus. It's a joint effort. This is not a world according to Lou or a world according to Chris Mellon or Tom DeLong. This is us trying to collect information and present it to the American people and allow the American people to decide if this is a topic that's important to them. Now, I will tell you, there are people right now in government, both legislative branch and executive branch, that are apparently pretty big fans of the show, because we've heard through colleagues of ours in D.C. after a particular episode comes out, people, they get a little nervous. They're saying, hey, man, I just got called to brief so-and-so. They saw the episode and they're asking me questions now. So
you heard it here from Lou. I mean, I believe it. I mean, we know Harry Reid's been involved. We know there are people in the Senate Intelligence Committee that are very interested in this. We know that there's folks in a lot of oversight committees that are also very interested in this. And for those of you out there, I mean, Harry Reid, Democrat, he's been a big advocate pushing for this, for disclosure. So have a lot of presidents been very interested in this. President Donald Trump is one of them. So I am going to continue to follow up on this, Lou. I am going to continue to watch every single season of Unidentified Inside America's UFO Investigation, because I believe that we're on to one of the greatest discoveries in humankind. And hopefully it's not the worst case scenario one, like in the Twilight Zone, where it's like how to serve mankind. And they literally meant how to serve mankind on a plate. I don't want to be that guy on the low totem pole, right? I want this to be, I believe it's important. I believe it's important for us as human beings to understand our universe, to understand our world, to be in awe and inspired by it, and to not ignore the facts when they present themselves, to investigate it no matter where that leads us. And I think we're so grateful to have you at the forefront of this, Lou. And I'm so grateful to have you as a friend. Thank you so much for being a part of this.
Sarah, thank you for fearlessly pursuing this. And again, this wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for folks like you out there in the media that are willing to to risk a lot, quite frankly, to have this conversation. So, again, our hats off to you. Thank you for everything that you do. Look forward to talking with you, and anything we can do to help, please, you have my direct number. Call me anytime.
That was just brilliant. I tell you, I'm so excited about following through and doing so many more of these shows. We've had Nick Pope on before. He worked formerly for the Defense Ministry of Great Britain. He's here in the United States now. He was charged with Great Britain's UFO project. So please go to Sara, the Sara Carter Show, wherever you get your podcast. Remember, you can go there, you can register, you can download the podcast, you can leave a review. It's so important for us. There's also the very first interview, which is just brilliant, with Luis Elizando. I mean, I wanted you to hear this one again because this was the latest on what was happening, especially with Russia as well, right? And I think that's important that we see that this isn't just a phenomenon that happens here in the United States. It's happening all over the world. Militaries all over the world, pilots all over the world have been reporting this phenomenon, and it seems to be increasing exponentially. So there's a reason for this. We'd like to get down to the bottom of it. But what you need to do is go to saracarter.com, and there you can find all the links. That's to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Rumble, Parler, YouTube. And then what you need to do as well is, if you're not signed up for this podcast, if you're not registered, please subscribe to the podcast. I don't care where you get it. If you get it at Apple, if you get it at Spotify, wherever you get it, just get it. Download, subscribe to this podcast, and we're going to keep this thing going because I've got so much to share with you. We have so many contacts that really you have not even seen or heard of in a long time. People that can fill you in on what's happening in the Pentagon. People that'll give you the latest. I mean, these interviews are incredible to me. They're my favorite part of my job, is doing this podcast, interviewing people like Luis, interviewing people like Nick Pope, and others who I've planned to come on the show, pilots, who've actually witnessed the aerial phenomena, people in the military, and as well as all the lawmakers and all the top stories of the day. So again, thank you so much for being with me while I'm on vacation. And thank you so much for being a part of the Sara Carter Show and listening and being a part of my family. It means a lot to me. And I look forward to coming back with all new stories next week. Thanks again. Today, I'm joined by Rebecca Weber, the CEO of the Association for Mature American Citizens. It's also known as AMAC. The most important question, I think, for so many people out there is, how much does AMAC membership cost? What does it cost the regular consumer?
Yeah, so for $16 a year, okay, or less, you can join at a 1, 3, or 5-year membership. You get a couple of things. You get the benefits. You get a great subscription to a magazine. So for $16, you're going to receive a bi-monthly magazine. But your voice is now going to be heard in Washington. We take our marching orders from you. If you stand for faith, family, freedom, if you believe in the Constitution, if you believe in the greatness of America, if you believe in individual freedoms and everything you just said, Sara, $16 is not a lot of money to join the 2.3 million members that are really fighting hard to ensure that America remains the best country in the world.
Rebecca, thanks so much for being with me today. I'm honored to have you and AMAC as a sponsor for the Sara Carter Show. You know, for more information, folks, visit amac.us/Carter.